המשיח אני מאמין. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין ואף על פי שיתממע עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. ואף על פי שיתממע עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין. אני מאמין. אני מאמין. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. בביאת המשיח אני מאמין ואף על פי שיתממע אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. אני מאמין. אני מאמין. אני מאמין. אני מאמין. Those words, created in the Warsaw Ghetto and sung as many walked to the gas chambers, are translated as follows. I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah. Even if the Messiah should tarry, I still believe. Based on Maimonides' 13 principles of faith, this tune is credited to Hasidic Muzzi's singer and composer Azriel David Fastag, and is known as one of the foremost tunes to come from the Holocaust.
Thank you so much to Cantor Lisa Doob. Welcome everyone to the final presentation of Lexington Historical Society's Lexington Remembers World War II lecture series. Tonight's presentation is called We Shall Not Forget, and we are looking at several Lexingtonians who have personal connections to the Holocaust. So before we get into the entirety of the program, I would just like to let everyone know that this is a webinar format, which means that you will have access to a Q&A as well as a chat window. So if you hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen, you will see a option for both of those things. The chat window can be used for any type of conversation if anyone would like to share stories or if anyone is having technical difficulties and needs help. And if anyone has a question, please do use the Q&A. And at the end of our program, we will be able to speak a little bit more with our presenters for anyone who has questions for them. And we are the only ones who will be able to see them if anyone is asking anything personal, and you can also ask anonymously. So to get things started, I would like to hand the mic over to George Gamota, who is the mastermind behind the Lexington Remembers World War II commemorations this year. And he would like to let everyone know why he chose this presentation specifically.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is George Gamota, and I'm the chair of Lexington Remembers World War II Committee, whose purpose is to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. As you may recall, September 2nd was the official end of World War II, and I hope when you go to the town center, you will see the banners proclaiming the end of the war. They will be there until after Veterans Day, November 11th. For a small town of some 6,000 people in the 1940s, Lexington sent over 1,460 men and women overseas to fight the aggressors and help retain freedom for people around the world. 55 of our fellow Lexingtonians made the utmost sacrifice and did not return home. The committee has been collecting information for over a year now on those that served and has a database detailing their lives. Along with the database, we're developing an electronic photo album that has images of those that served and their histories. We encourage all who have additional information on World War II veterans to provide it to us so that we can share it with others. Finally, I would like to encourage you to view our collection of oral histories of men and women who lived through the war, overseas and on the home front. All of these vivid stories are available on our website, Lex Media On Demand, as well as YouTube. Today's lecture, as Sarah says, is our last one, the 7th in the series, the last one of World War II, the Holocaust. All wars are tragedies, but World War II was also a war between forces, good and evil, with one side trying to dehumanize millions of people and then systematically try to eliminate them from Earth. The Jews took the brunt of this onslaught, but others who did not fit the image of a perfect man suffered: gypsies, handicapped, gays, and others. As we commemorate the end of the war and honor the heroes, we also need to remind us why we fought in the first place, so that no such tragedy and injustice can happen again. Never again is the slogan. Let me now ask Linda Dixon to this virtual podium, who will introduce our organizer, Bebe Fallick. Linda?
Thank you, George. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our final series of Lexington Remembers World War II. The title of the program, We Shall Not Forget, is a reminder to us all to remember the loss of those 6 million souls. Let me get the program underway by introducing our main presenter, Bebe Fallick, who will then introduce our other distinguished speakers. Some of you know Bebe Fallick as the former Lexington Town Clerk. Some know her as a high school teacher and a preschool teacher. During the 56 years that she and her husband Gary have lived in Lexington, Bebe has been a member of the Historical Commission, the Conservation Commission, and a member of several subcommittees. Currently, she's a member of the Tourism Committee and the Monuments and Memorials Committee. She's a longtime town meeting member. Bebe and Gary are active members of Temple Isaiah. Bebe will tell the story of her mother, Mildred Moskowitz, who arrived in New York as a young girl before the onset of World War II. Her extended family of 200 relatives remained behind in Europe. For the rest of the story, please welcome Bebe Fallick.
Thank you, Linda, for that lovely introduction and for your support throughout the program. Thank you also to Sarah McDonough and George Gamota, and to my husband, Gary, for his technical assistance. I came to the first meeting of this committee as liaison for the town's tourism committee. Technical difficulties. We have it all here, just have to get it out. Sarah, do you have any input for us to get our first slide up?
Sure, if you need some help, I can bring it up on my computer. Oh, looks like you got something going there.
We just
And in
got a
the
screen share message.
And in the meantime, what I am going to do is to drop a link so that anyone who would like more information about our World War II celebrations can find them, because we do have a separate website just for that, which has lists of those who served, oral histories, and more information that George has very lovingly set up with the help of Harry Forstick.
Can you see it?
And just let me know if you would like me to pull anything up for you, Bebe.
Try this one more. Okay, let me try.
Oh, Gary's trying one other thing. I think I should.
Sure.
I was premature with my thank you for the technical assistance. I can't do any of this part at all, but we've run this so many times and we've never had a problem. So just give us another minute.
Well, I'm very glad that I had multiple options of getting photos up on the screen after the introduction. So we're all learning here.
Get that off.
I can see it there in the background.
Yes, yes, we have it.
Perfect.
Just have a little too much.
Start the
This-
slideshow in a second.
yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
You had it.
I did have it, didn't I? Didn't I have it though?
There we go.
Okay, where's the slideshow? Oh, here.
Do you need to see this better?
Yes. Hold on 1 second. Okay, okay. I should have left that up before.
Hmm? Go
I
ahead.
should've left that
Go
up
ahead.
before.
What?
Ready?
Yeah. Keep that one. So just to repeat, I came to the first meeting of this committee as a liaison for the town's tourism committee. As George read down his list, asking for people to head the various aspects of programming, it was obvious to me that I would volunteer to chair the Holocaust evening. Cantor Lisa Doob of Temple Isaiah graciously agreed to bless us with music, and Lexington residents Cheryl Meadow and Peter Lund offered their stories. This is a Holocaust plaque that I happened upon in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It reads, From 1939 to 1945, Nazi Germany realized its fantasy of annihilating the Jews of Europe. In forests and villages, in ghettos, slave labor and concentration camps, in 6 specially created death camps, Jews were brutally starved, beaten, worked, shot, and gassed to death. The earth was soaked with their blood. The sky was filled with their ashes. And the world was preoccupied with other things. This is the emblem which Jews and the general population were forced to sew on their clothing as soon as they came under Nazi control. It is based on the Star of David, the 6-pointed Jewish star, and Judah is German for Jew. Jewish interaction with German forces existed even in World War I. The heart in this old photo points to my mother, then an early teenager. Her handwriting reads, Baranowitz, 1918, working in fields under German occupation on a rainy day. Notice the guard behind her. However harsh the conditions were in World War I, they pale by comparison with World War II. Before the Nazi takeover of power in 1933, Europe had a vibrant and mature Jewish culture. By 1945, most European Jews, 2 out of every 3, had been killed. When attempting to document numbers of the victims of the Holocaust, the most important thing to keep in mind is that no one master list of those who perished exists anywhere in the world. The Germans themselves kept very accurate and precise records. Czechoslovakia, Germany, Hungary, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Poland, Romania, and the Soviet Union. These 8 countries account for almost 6 million victims, giving rise to the phrase, the 6 million. Dachau was the first concentration camp established in Nazi Germany. The camp was opened on March 22nd, 1933. The camp's first inmates were primarily political prisoners, social democrats, communists, trade unionists, habitual criminals, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, beggars, vagrants, and hawkers. Eventually, the Nazis created a more secluded and organized method of killing. Extermination centers were established in occupied Poland with special apparatus designed for mass murder, giant death machines. 6 such death camps existed: Auschwitz-Birkenau, Belzec, Chełmno, Majdanek, Sobibor, and Treblinka, all in Poland. Large-scale murder by gas and body disposal through cremation were conducted systematically by the Nazis and Adolf Hitler's SS men. After the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, killing units named Einsatzgruppen, meaning operational groups, following the wake of the German army, began shooting massive numbers of Jews and Gypsies in open fields and ravines on the outskirts of conquered cities and towns. There are two places underlined on this map, and I know it's difficult to see all of these maps, and I apologize for that. WWII, the top one, is the small city where my mother was born and lived, and where most of her family were murdered. Babi Yar is perhaps the most infamous group massacre. On September 29th and 30th, 1941, SS and German police units and their auxiliaries, under the guidance of Einsatzgruppe C, murdered the Jewish population of Kiev at Babi Yar, a ravine northwest of the city. This was one of the largest mass murders. As the victims moved into the ravine, detachments shot them in small groups. According to reports to headquarters, 33,771 Jews were massacred in 2 days. In the months following the massacre, German authorities stationed at Kiev killed thousands more Jews at Babi Yar, as well as non-Jews. It is estimated that some 100,000 people were murdered at Babi Yar. The Soviet army liberated Kiev on November 6, 1943. This is a portrait of 5-year-old Manya Halef, a Jewish child who was later killed in the mass executions at Babi Yar. These two children are my mother's niece and nephew, my Russian first cousins. They represent an entire family that was wiped out, over 200 members of an extended family. Had they lived, they would be my age now. The number of children killed during the Holocaust is not fathomable, and full statistics for the tragic fate of children who died will never be known. Estimates range as high as 1.5 million murdered children. Never before in history had children been singled out for destruction for no other reason than having been born. At the end of the war, only one of my mother's European siblings was alive. On the left is my uncle Zhushka Shmushkovitz in his younger days. And on the right is my renamed Uncle Samuel Small after he came to live with us. The miracle that reunited my Uncle Sam with us was a letter. Throughout the war, unaware of their fate, my mother continuously wrote letters to her family, though she did not receive answers. I can still see her hunched over her desk with her fountain pen in her hand. After liberation, when my uncle returned to Baranovich, he found one letter with our return address still being held by the International Red Cross. It was the only letter that had survived. Happier photos. Included in my photos are 4 of my American first cousins who are shown in their US uniforms. On my mother's side, Leonard Gerber, who served in the Pacific, Herbert Yarkin and his wife Shirley. He served on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And the sailor and the Marine later became brothers-in-law. On my father's side, Milton Shapiro, who served on Corregidor and Guadalcanal, and his younger brother Julius, who served in Europe. Fortunately, these four returned home to start the rest of their wonderful lives. Our oldest granddaughter, who is named for my mother, grew up in Oakland, California. She is Jewish and attended a Catholic high school, which sponsors an annual Holocaust study tour. These are some of her thoughts as a 17-year-old. In April, I went on a Holocaust study tour with my school. We visited Berlin, Prague, and Krakow. In between Krakow and Prague, we stayed a night in the town of Auschwitz. And the next day, we spent the entire day touring Auschwitz-Birkenau. We first went to Auschwitz for a tour in the morning. There was another Jewish girl on the trip, and she said to me, "This is terrifying." And I responded, "I cannot breathe." My eyes locked on the iconic sign, Arbeit macht frei, or in English, labor makes you free. I knew inside that I was as far away from home, physically and emotionally, as I have ever been in my entire life. I was in a place that was completely without comfort. The moment I thought I would be able to make it through without crying, I was proved wrong. Even though I knew the result and the end of what happened, I still felt like there was no hope and that there never would be hope. We spent another hour and then left for Krakow, but I didn't forget anything. I didn't forget the emotions, the atmosphere, and how everyone interacted with the place. Towards the end of our trip, the group also realized that we were leaving with more questions than answers, but that was okay. And the questions were more important than getting all the answers, because it kept us continuing to learn about this important topic. And I learned something even more important. Remember. My great-grandmother came from Russia in the early 20th century before the Holocaust. She brought a picture with her, and on that picture, a member of her family had written, "Remember us, please." That's what this trip was for me. It was not only an amazing learning experience, but also a way to remember my family and all the victims. We need to keep remembering to make sure that future generations remember, and for us to remember what millions of innocent people went through, because we cannot let them die in vain. We have to teach about it to prevent it from happening again. And like I said, remember. These are a portion of the thoughts of a 17-year-old. The New England Holocaust Memorial is located in Boston on Union Street behind the City Hall. 6 glass towers rise above fire pits, with smoke rising up to the heavens. Incised on the black granite ramps is the word "remember." Etched on the glass towers are 6 million numbers. Each of the 6 burning chambers is named after one of the death camps in Poland. This memorial to darkness is built with light, and these 6 towers are emblems of faith, towers of hope and aspiration. Among Jews, candles are lit each year on the anniversaries of the deaths of family members. In Yiddish, these anniversaries are termed Yahrzeit, referring to the time of year. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. So how do you speak the unspeakable? You sing it. Born and raised in Winnipeg, Canada, Cantor Doob was ordained by Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 2001. Prior to her arrival in Lexington, Massachusetts, she served congregations in the Baltimore, Brooklyn, and Chicago areas. As a cantor, Lisa is passionate about creating relationships through music, whether in services, B'nai Mitzvah lessons, choir, or religious school. She has performed in concerts in Jerusalem, Baltimore, Brooklyn, Manhattan, San Diego, Tulsa, New Orleans, Boston, Syracuse, and Chicago. Some of Lisa's music has been published in the Complete Jewish Songbook for Children, Volume 2, Tzedek Teardorf, the Social Action Songbook, and Refuah Shlema, Songs of Jewish Healing. She is a contributing author to the 2014 volume, Music, Carrier of Intention in 49 Jewish Prayers. Lisa was also a member of the Boston cohort of Kesher Shir, a Jewish songwriting collaborative project. Lisa is proud to be cantor of Temple Isaiah, and we are proud to have her. And she lives nearby with her husband and 3 children.
Thank you, Bebe. We remember at all those times that Bebe mentioned. And specifically, we remember on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Remembrance Day. Yom HaShoah, day of sadness, day of sorrow set apart. Keep the flame of memory glowing, keep it glowing in your heart. When the world longs to forget this day of sorrow, we must not. Yom HaShoah, we remember, day of sadness ne'er forgot. Yom HaShoah, we remember, day of sadness ne'er forgot.
Thank you. Cheryl Meadow has been an active community volunteer since moving to Lexington 12 years ago with her family. In 2009, she and her husband Merrill founded Monroe Saturday Nights, a performing arts series of the Monroe Center for the Arts. Cheryl has also served as chair of digital communications and webmaster for Lexington's 300th anniversary celebrations, where I first met her, and has sat on the boards of the Lexington Education Foundation, the Lexington Council for the Arts, and Lexington's MLK Day of Service. Cheryl?
Thank you, Bebe. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to sharing my story with you. On July 15th, in the penultimate entry into her diary, Anne Frank wrote, "It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them because, in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." In the early 1930s, my mother's entire family, originally from Poland, lived in Frankfurt, Germany. But by 1938, they had all fled, settling throughout Western Europe, Palestine, and the US, with my mom and her parents arriving at Ellis Island just a few months before Kristallnacht. Among the earliest of them to escape the rising anti-Semitism was my great aunt Minna's family. She and her husband Lipa and young son Siggy moved to Milan in 1934. The family's experiences illustrate the goodness of which Anne Frank wrote, a quiet heroism that took place during World War II in the mountains of northern Italy. As textbooks teach, the oppression of Italian Jews began in 1938 with the enactment of the racial laws of segregation by the fascist regime of Benito Mussolini. But it's much less well known how many Italians risked their lives to save Jewish residents and refugees. Many Italian authorities opposed or subverted the Nazis' extermination plans, and countless ordinary Italian families proactively protected Jews by hiding them in secret shelters. When the anti-Jewish laws went into effect in 1938, my great aunt, uncle, and cousins, baby Marina was born in 1936, were still living in Milan. Under the threat of internment, Uncle Lipa traveled to Belgium, intending to have his family join him once he settled, and then emigrate to the United States. Little did he or his family know that they would never see each other again. The facts are incomplete, but in his USC Shoah Foundation testimony in 1998, Siggy shares his theory. Minna and Lipa decided that their internment concerns were unfounded. Lipa's brother had stayed behind in Milan and hadn't been arrested. So they decided together that he would return home. But Lipa was arrested at the Belgian border for traveling without papers. Ironically and tragically, he was interned in a camp in Belgium. After the Germans invaded Belgium in 1940, his family never heard from him again. Years later, transport records found at the US Holocaust Museum indicated that Lipa was put on a train to Auschwitz, but there were no records of his arrival. There were reports of an attempted escape from the train and guards shooting the fleeing prisoners in the back. Minna, knowing her husband as she did, thought Lipa was one of those prisoners. Or he may have died in the gas chambers at Auschwitz. We just don't know. From 1938 to 1940, Minna, Siggy, and Marina remained in Milan and carried on without Lipa. My Aunt Minna was a courageous and resourceful single mother. She sold furs at a shop to bring in some money while her landlord's wife watched the kids. She had an indomitable spirit, an incredible sense of humor, and was a survivor in the truest sense of the word. Allied bombs began dropping on Milan in 1940, but there wasn't much damage in the early days. The heavy bombing began in 1941. Typically dropped at night, at times the explosions were so intense and long-lasting that entire evenings were spent in a concrete bunker with their neighbors. One day, though, the shelling began during the day. The kids were at the movies, and Minna was out buying food for Shabbat dinner. With the bombs falling all around her, Minna worked her way toward home. There, she learned that although the cinema had been bombarded, her children were safe As fate would have it, they didn't like the movie and they left early. In 1942, Minna moved the family to Gandino, a small mountainous village about 70 kilometers northeast of Milan. There they escaped the bombs. But in 1943, Hitler invaded Italy, and now they had to escape the Nazis. Minna's non-Jewish friends and some compassionate strangers helped devise a plan for their safety. They would travel into the mountains and hide with new identities. Giovanni Cervalli, a clerk in the Gandino Hall, about 28 years old, issued false papers and food rations for the family. Minna, Siggy, and Marina would now be known as Maria Lovarini, Gilberto Carnazzi, and Maria Carnazzi. Giovanni Cervalli was a hero. Throughout 1943, as more Jewish families came through Gandino from Nazi-controlled countries, Cervalli issued false documents to many of them. He never charged anyone a lira. Had he been caught, he likely would have been tortured and certainly killed, for in 1942, a death penalty was put in place for protecting or hiding Jews. To reach their first hiding place, an empty summer camp located on an isolated mountaintop, Minna and my cousins, then aged 7 and 5, hiked rugged terrain with a pack mule carrying some of their belongings. A school principal named Vincenzo Rudelli owned the camp and ultimately hid at least a dozen families. There for a few months, they were relatively safe. Neighbors brought what food they could, and Siggy would forage for mushrooms, hiding whenever planes flew overhead. When winter came, they had to move again. The camp buildings had no heat, and the snow would make it very hard for food to be delivered. They went on to hide in a farmhouse owned by Francesco Lorenzo and Maria Chiara Carnazzi Nodara. Located in the valley, it was closer to town, making it easier to get supplies. The winter was exceptionally cold, though, and except for the wood stove in the kitchen, they had no heat. As a result, they spent much of their days and nights wearing their woolen hats, mittens, and coats. When word got to Minna that there were suspicious people looking for them in the village, she knew it was time to move on. This time, Minna made arrangements for the kids to be hidden as Catholic students at a boarding school in a convent in Gazzaniga. Under the cover of darkness, they walked for 3 hours and arrived before dawn at the Sisters of Maria Bambina. Siggy began studies in the 3rd grade and Marina in the 1st, hidden out in the open, while their mother hid unseen in the homes of a number of generous families in Gandino. The Mother Superior assured Minna that only she would know Siggy and Marina's true identities. This proved to be a challenge in a number of ways. For example, young students were typically bathed by the nuns, so Mother Superior needed to make special arrangements for Siggy, as his circumcision would most certainly raise suspicion. Within the first week of school, Siggy learned that a priest would be coming to class for weekly catechism lessons. He panicked. He was Jewish. He did not know catechism. Luckily, in that first class, the priest did not call on him. The dread of being discovered as a Jew in hiding prompted the 9-year-old to study as much of the Catholic catechism as he could that week. The priest was surprised when Siggy raised his hand with the correct answers each week thereafter. In later life, Sig would be asked how a Jewish child so young could learn catechism so quickly. He would say with a laugh that fear for your life increases your brain power. Throughout the year, Minna, Siggy, and Marina thought that no one knew they were Jewish. But as they left the convent at the end of the school year in 1944, it became clear that all the nuns and even the priest knew from the start that the kids were Jews in hiding. Not a slip of the tongue, their secret was not betrayed. Again, Minna needed to find a new place for them to hide. The Nazis still occupied Italy, and SS troops took up residence in the school in Gandino. It was much more dangerous than ever to be a Jew in hiding. Furthermore, the Nazis were systematically searching all of the homes in Gandino for munitions, which had been stored in the town by partisans who were fighting up in the mountains. They found refuge in the home of Bortolo and Patestina Ungaro. The Ungaros and their 3 children concealed my aunt and cousins for more than a year until the Allies liberated Italy. It was the longest my family had stayed in one place. I don't know the story of how they came to live with the Ungaros, but interestingly, they had met them briefly in 1943 as they were trekking up the mountain to their first home, the hiding spot at the top of the mountain, the empty camp. Bortolo and his family were hiking the mountain behind them, and when, unbeknownst to Minna, her alarm clock had fallen off the pack mule, Bortolo retrieved it and caught up to them to return it. Minna, Sig, and Marina eventually returned to Milan after the war. My grandfather would sponsor each of them to come to the US. Due to the existing quota system, Siggy was the first to get his visa as he was born in Germany. So in 1947, at the age of 14, he traveled alone by ship on the SS Vulcania and arrived at Ellis Island just before Thanksgiving, which became his favorite holiday. He lived with my mom and grandparents, whom he'd never met before because of the diaspora of my family. It would take until 1950 for Minna and Marina to receive their visas to emigrate to the States. They too lived with my grandparents until they were able to get housing on their own. Siggy and Marina kept in touch with the families who had saved them. Siggy visited at least 6 times, twice with his children and granddaughter. The friendship between the Lois and the Cervallis, Rudellis, Lorenzos, and Ungaros grew as their respective families grew, and to this day there is great affection between the descendants of the Italians and Americans. One year, when visiting with Giovanni Cervalli, the town clerk who issued the false papers, Sig asked Giovanni's adult children if they knew that their father was a hero during the war. They didn't know what he was talking about. Giovanni had never said a word to them about it. When pressed at that visit, he said, "It was nothing. He just helped people who were in trouble." On another trip to Gandino, this time with his family, Sig brought them to the convent in Gazzaniga. It had become a home for the aged. When Sig asked the current Mother Superior if he could show them around, he was shocked to learn that this was the first she had known of Jewish children being hidden there during the war. How could that be? I believe it was yet another example of the unpretentious and humble nature of their northern Italian protectors. Even decades after the war, they never divulged their clandestine efforts. In 2019, and in poor health, Sig took one more trip to Gandino with his family. He told me that whenever he returned there, he would express his deep gratitude to these families who saved his life and the lives of his mother and sister. I was really surprised to learn that each time they replied with profuse gratitude to him and to his family for not forgetting them. Feeling that these unsung heroes should receive acknowledgement for their self-sacrifice, Marina worked with Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, to ask the State of Israel to award the highest civilian honors to these families. Hasadei Umot Ha'olam, or the Righteous Among Nations, was awarded to non-Jews who, for altruistic reasons, risked their lives during the Holocaust to save Jews from extermination. In 2004, she succeeded. As we know, Anne Frank was wise for her years, and she was right. People are really good at heart. My family experienced this goodness, not one found in many history books, because until the late 1990s, No one from the village itself had really talked about it. Their humility was such that they didn't think there was anything remarkable about hiding Jewish families from the Nazis, when in truth, it took extraordinary bravery to do so, as they put their families at great and themselves at great risk. The people of Gandino saved upwards of 60 Jews during the occupation and the war. I'd like to thank Bebe for the opportunity to share my family's story. It's very meaningful. Sadly, Sig passed away a few months ago, and his wife passed away just last week. So it was very meaningful and poignant for me to share the story of how he lived a full life after his experiences during the Holocaust. And I'm going to close with this video narrated by Siggy, which was adapted from his USC Shoah Foundation testimony in 1998. I thought it would be interesting for you to hear his beautiful voice and him explain the photographs. So bear with me for 1 second, please. I'm sorry. Oh, I practiced. Believe me, it worked.
It was working even earlier this evening, Cheryl. So you're having the
Yeah,
same problem that we did.
yeah. So it'll take me 30 seconds, I promise. Perhaps you can take a deep breath.
Beautiful.
Well, I should take a deep breath, actually.
I
You
had
know, if you keep having problems, and I can get it started on my end as well.
Okay, I do think I have it. Are you able to hear that?
Nope, not yet.
Okay, forgive me, please.
Cheryl, relax. Everything's fine.
Okay. Yeah, come in. I'm going to have my 23-year-old help me because she's a pro. So let's try the share screen one more time. Why is it not popping up?
There should be a button as well for optimize video.
No. Can you hear that?
Taken
I'm sorry, I'm going to just start it from the
late
beginning.
30s.
Here it is.
Bear with
This
me.
first
Thank
picture,
you.
I don't know when it was taken, but it's my father's family portrait. That's my father. That photo must have been taken in late 30s. Must be in the late 30s. And so he must have been about, in his 20s. This is my mother. This picture must have been taken sometime in the early 1950s. I don't know exactly. It's obviously in the United States because of the door that I see there, and it's one of the few pictures that I have right now of her. Well, her name was Mariam. Her nickname was Minna. Everybody called her Minna. This is a picture of me in 1934. I was just a little over a year old, and it must have been taken either in Poland or in France, but this was after we left Germany and on our way to Italy. This picture was taken in Milano, I would say in the late 1930s. It's my mother, my sister Marina, and me. This is the first house. This picture was taken actually 2 years ago. And when I went back to Gandino and we went up to the mountain that we had hidden in. And I took a picture of this house. It's the only time I was able to take a picture. And that is where we hid. This is the house that in the summer was a summer camp for boys. So you can see there are many doors and many windows. and we occupy one of those rooms and one of those windows. I think it's in the far right-hand corner, the end of the building. I think that might have been our room, but it's difficult to remember. Now, this is the house that we hid in after we came from the mountain, the other house on top of the mountain. This was in the valley, and the room to the left is where we slept, and it was ice cold in there. As I mentioned, most of the people that helped us are no longer with us now, but we did visit them at the cemetery, and the one that I mentioned earlier was Giovanni Cervalli, who worked at the town hall and helped us with documents. And then we also visited Bartolo Ongaro, who is the father of Beppo. He's the gentleman over whose house we lived for a long time, and his wife is buried next to him. Her name was Battistina. But this is a picture of my children that was taken, I think, last June. From right to left is my son Jeff, my daughter Lisa, that is me in the center, my daughter Jessica, and my son David.
Hirsch Glick wrote the Partisan Song in the Vilna Ghetto. It is a song that followed him to Estonia, where the partisans fought against Hitler and his crew. And this particular song says the following: "Never say you are walking the last road, despite leaden skies obscuring the blue days. The hour we have longed for will come. Our step will beat out like a drum. We are here. From green palmlands to distant land of snow, we're advancing with our pain, with our woe. And where a spurt of our blood has fallen, will our heroes and our courage spring up. The morning song will gild our todays, and our yesterdays will disappear with our enemies. But if the sun and the dawn are late in coming, this song should go like a password through generations. This song is written with blood and not with lead. It's not a song from a bird flying free. Here, a people between collapsing walls sang this song with pistols in their hands. So never say you are walking the last road. Even if lead skies obscure the blue days, our longed for hour will still come. Our step will beat like a drum. We are here." Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst am letzten Weg, weil Himmeln bleien ist verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Svete pojkt an unser Trott mir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Sveta pojkt an unser Trott mir seinen da. Von grünem Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen diese Spritz von unser Blut? Sprotzend wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen diese Spritz von unser Blut? Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgensonne begilden uns dem Heind. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur ob versammen wird die Sonne und der Kajor. Wie a Parol so gehen das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Nur heut versammen wird die Sonne und den Kajor. Wie a Parol so gehen das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von a Vogel läuft er frei. Da hat das Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit ne Garnis in die Hand. Da hat das Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit na Garnis in die Hand. Du sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, weil Himmeln bleien verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, es wird abheugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, es wird abheugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da.
In a world of total moral collapse, there was a minority who mustered extraordinary courage to uphold human values. Peter Lund's parents emigrated from Denmark in the mid-1920s. They moved to Lexington in 1943. He graduated from Lexington High School and holds degrees from Tufts and Northeastern universities. He saw active duty as an officer in the United States Navy during the height of the Cold War, and later in the active reserve, had command of coastal minesweepers. For the 25 years prior to his retirement, he was the executive director of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers. And, by the way, he had an uncle and a cousin who were members of the Danish resistance. Peter?
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And I feel most privileged to be a part of this event. So thank you very much. So let us escape from Denmark. Just to go back a little bit to Bebe's slide, Denmark is a peninsula that sticks out of northern Germany. Kiel Canal is the border between the two countries. And to the east of the peninsula of Jutland lie two Danish islands. Copenhagen is located on one of those islands. To the northeast is Sweden, and that's just 3 miles away at its narrowest point. And this is sort of something we should remember. And further to the north is the Baltic Sea, and to the west is the North Sea. And if you keep going, you'll wind up in England. The invasion. The Germans invaded Denmark on the 9th of April, 1940. Denmark capitulated almost immediately after the Germans marched across the border. But they did strike a deal with the Germans. They agreed at the opening there would be no sabotage and they would become the model protectorate. They were sort of Hitler's Aryan race, complete because of their blonde and blue-eyed nature. The Danes could keep their king, they could keep their parliament, and most importantly, there would be no persecution of the Jews, of which there are about 7,700. So let us fast forward to 1943. The Allies were winning in Europe, but there was still 18 months to go before victory. The Germans demanded of the Danes a production shift to war materials, and strikes occurred, which infuriated the Germans. The Danes rejected the Nazi Party in a spring election, and further infuriating the Germans. The Germans consequently declared martial law. The king was placed under palace arrest, and the Germans stole the list of all Jews, their names and addresses in the whole country. And they set the dates of October 1 and 2 for the roundup of all Jews. The roundup. Jews were gathered at home. It was a Friday evening, October 1. The Germans had 2 ships stationed in Copenhagen Harbor. A train with 40 cattle cars was standing by to transport people. 50 flatbed trucks and German police were strategically placed throughout the city of Copenhagen for the roundup. The Germans knocked on the doors of Jews, no answer. They broke down doors, no answer, no Jews. They questioned neighbors, the neighbors knew nothing. Well, what had happened? The Jewish community had been warned and gone into hiding. They stayed with friends, business associates. Some went to hospitals where they were admitted as patients under Christian names. Neighbors helping neighbors. The Jews authorized others through a power of attorney to protect their belongings. Some Jews fled to the farms in the country. The arrests that night were nearly 200 from nursing homes, mostly the sick and the infirm, and 82 were captured elsewhere. Now, how was this all possible? Well, a few days prior to October 1, the German naval attaché working at the German embassy, and he had been posted to Denmark in earlier years, tipped off the leader of the Danish Labour Party about the roundup. He in turn warned the Jewish community, it's time to leave. The news spread. It reached the ears of Rabbi Melchior of Copenhagen's main synagogue. He interrupted New Year's service, it was Rosh Hashanah, and urged the congregation to go into hiding. So now the Jewish community is hiding. The exodus to Sweden. Enter the Danish Freedom Council, a proclamation read in part, among the Danish people, the Jews do not constitute a special class, but are citizens as to the same degree as other Danes. We Danes know that the whole population stands behind resistance to the German oppressors. The council calls on all Danish population to help in every way possible those Jewish fellow citizens who have not yet succeeded in escaping abroad. The Lutheran bishop in Denmark issued a statement. Wherever Jews are persecuted because of their race or religion, it is the duty of the Christian church to protect them. We must obey God before we obey man. The Jewish community headed for the coast, and with the underground assisting. No names were ever exchanged. The Danes left messages to would-be informers that if they did inform, their lives would be very much in danger. Fishing boats were volunteered to take the trip to Sweden. Remember, at the narrowest point, Sweden is only 3 miles away. Some captains were paid, some would not participate. There was a freight train, for instance, that ran between neutral Sweden and south to Germany, but it had to cross on the ferry to get back and forth to Sweden. So the returning empty cars going back to Sweden would stop at predetermined points and pick up escapees and carry them to Sweden. A key rendezvous point for fleeing Jews in Copenhagen was a bookstore. When a certain book was displayed in the store window, it was safe to enter by the front door and then exit with a courier out the back door. The shopkeeper became much annoyed when anyone came into his shop to actually purchase a book. One fishing boat captain on his way to Sweden with refugees in his hold was stopped by a German patrol boat. The boarding officer was promptly informed by the skipper that he had no business on his boat, and if he did not leave immediately, he would be reported to higher authority. The boarding officer turned tail and departed, and the fishing boat continued to Sweden. Well, why and how did the Danes pull this off? Number one, there's a fundamental Danish philosophy that a Dane is a Dane is a Dane, regardless of your religion, or national origin, ethnicity, or other affiliation. And number two, certainly the tip-off from the German naval attaché was instrumental. Thirdly, the personality of the king, Christian X, and he was beloved by his people. And even during the occupation, the king would take his daily horseback ride through the city of Copenhagen with no escort, and he was never touched. A quick story. During the occupation, the German flag was hoisted on the flagpole in the palace courtyard. The king immediately sent one of his personal guard out to haul down the German flag, and the man did it. A German officer arrived and said, "Who took down the flag and replaced it with yours?" And the king replied, "I ordered one of my soldiers to take it down. If he does that again, he will be shot." King replied, "Then I shall be that soldier." The German flag never again flew in the courtyard, and the flag of Denmark did, a constant reminder of the resistance. Many fishing boats became available, and $600,000 was raised to help finance that evacuation. The geographic location of neutral Sweden, just 3 miles away, but certainly wider at certain other points. Let me relate to you the story of Niels Bohr. Now, Niels Bohr was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1922, and he and Einstein were sort of running mates. Bohr's mother was Lutheran, his father was Jewish, and he was one of those tipped off that the roundup was about to happen, and he fled to Sweden. Well, the Swedes were not too keen on this Jewish migration, but the Germans could really use Bohr and was putting pressure on neutral Sweden to turn him over. I think this was a sticky wicket for Sweden. So Bohr, knowing this, said to the Swedish king, "If you say publicly that all Danish Jews are welcome, I will then get out of your hair." The king of Sweden said, "Okay," and Bohr fled Sweden in the bomb bay of a British Mosquito fighter bomber. Bohr was later a key player in the Manhattan Project, which ultimately led to the atomic bomb. German dogs were trained to sniff out people, but the Danes developed a potion where you mixed dried blood with cocaine, which deadened the dog's sense of smell. Number 7, many German soldiers and sailors looked the other way. You know, Denmark was good duty. It sure beat being on the Russian front. It was good food, there was beer, and there were women. Relationships developed and sympathies arose. One example, one German Coast Guard commander ordered all of his boats into the dockyard for little needed repairs during the Exodus. The brashness of the Danes, starting with the king. Recall the skipper of the fishing boat who ordered the Germans off his boat. Well, the final result. Of the 7,700 members of the Jewish community, 7,200 were safely evacuated to Sweden. 500 were deported to Theresienstadt, which was the model German concentration camp, and the only one the Red Cross was allowed to inspect. And only 51 did not survive Theresienstadt. If you were to ask me, why were the Danish people able to pull this off, I would answer, their fundamental belief that a Dane is a Dane is a Dane is a Dane. And secondly, the charisma of the king, Christian X. On that note, let me close with a final story about the king. Early in the occupation, the king was asked by Hitler that they combine their respective governments. After all, they had a common border, the languages were not dissimilar, and they were blonde and blue-eyed. They were true Aryans in Hitler's mind. Now, the king replied to this overture by writing back and saying, "I have given your suggestion much thought, but at my age," he was in his 70s, "I think I am too old to rule over 2 countries." I'd like to thank you so much for having me. This has been a very formidable program, and thanks so much. I'm honored.
Hungarian-born Hannah Senesh immigrated to the country that would soon become Israel, and during World War II was part of the British Army as a Special Operations Executive Member. During that time, she parachuted into Yugoslavia, or what was then Yugoslavia, in an attempt to rescue Hungarian Jews. She was arrested, tortured, and refused to reveal her mission, and eventually was executed by firing squad. Hannah Senesh was also a poet, and her words talk about, among other things, what is truly important to remember in times of trial. Her poem, Eli, Eli, O God, my God, is one that is often invoked when we remember the Shoah, the Holocaust. O God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, החול והים, ריש רוש של המים, ברק השמיים, טבילת האדם, החול והים, ריש רוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם.
Questions.
This.
Thank you so much. Just going to try and get us back into gallery view here.
Bebe has a slide to put up.
Yeah. The book slide.
Perfect. You're ready.
Keep going. Here it is. We shall not forget memories of the Holocaust. Gary, get the phone.
That's not us.
The book, I'm sorry, this book is a compilation of memories of Temple Isaiah members. And it's available for sale. And to obtain a copy, email Ruth Lynn at ruthlynn33@gmail.com for details. Many, many incredible stories that are first person copies. I think we're ready for the Q&A.
All right. So if there is anyone in the audience who has questions for our presenters, feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. So again, if you hover your mouse around the bottom of the screen, you will see a few options for interaction with us. The chat window is great for sharing any personal family stories. And if you have any specific questions for any or all of our presenters, they would love to share more with you.
And while we're waiting for some questions to appear, We invited people, if they wanted to share some personal stories. And Gerald Moore has written one. He says, my father was with the US 9th Armored Division, which liberated the Flossenburg concentration camp. Now that was a camp for Polish and Hungarian Jewish females on the German-Czech border. He never spoke about it, and we only found out about it after his death. So common, right? So common. And Miriam Boucher writes a memory. When I was in college, I went home with my then boyfriend. I can still remember seeing the number tattooed on the skin of the inner arm of his father. Sarah, back to you.
All right, well, I'm seeing one other great story down here from Esther Hu. She says, thank you to all for sharing. She also has a family story. She visited Buchenwald, and she said that the experience was intense. And there was a plaque on the ground listing the different ethnic groups that had died there, and it also included people of Chinese descent. Mm-hmm. And I am seeing something in the chat window. This is a question for Bebe from Nan. Do you know what prompted your mother to leave the family and emigrate on her own?
She was one of 13 children. To say that they didn't have the best of everything is an understatement. She actually had an older sister who had come about 2 years before. And so the family raised enough money to send my mother and a year younger sister to New York, where they were welcomed by the older sister and went looking for the gold on the streets of New York City.
Wow.
So that's a story that would take another whole hour.
Yeah.
She was a typical Lower East Side story, working in the sweatshops. She spoke, when she came here, she spoke Yiddish, Hebrew, German, Polish, and Russian.
Wow.
But no English. So she worked during the day and went to night school to learn English. And by the end of her life, wrote beautifully in a number of languages, but primarily in English.
It's incredible.
We invite any of the panelists, if you have a question for any of your fellow panelists, feel free to pipe in and ask. So feel free to do that.
One thing that sort of struck me about this as we're all remembering the previous generations is that, of course, all of us, I imagine, identify pretty strongly as American. And I wonder if that affects how you view these stories and how you relate to your relatives who were not from America.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
I just have one thought that I'd like to share with you. Gary and I were on a trip to Czechoslovakia, to the Kolín, where Temple Isaiah's memorial scroll comes from. And Gary and I were standing talking to someone from Kolín in English. And she talked about the kind of thing that you have mentioned about papers, Cheryl, you especially, papers being drawn up that helped save people. And I stood there and I turned to Gary and I said, oh my, wow. At that point, I was the Lexington Town Clerk, and I had it in my power to create birth, death, and marriage certificates without question. And I said to Gary, I really don't know if I could have done it. I guess I would have had to be in the situation and seen how moral I was, but with not only myself being a consideration, but Gary and our children, would I have been as brave? And I don't know the answer to that. I come back to that any number of times. So.
I'd like to ask a question to Peter. Peter, Sweden was neutral during the war, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden, they're finding themselves with thousands of Jews being deposited on their shore, right? I
Correct.
don't, willingly or not, I don't know, but that now suddenly greatly risks their neutral status and their vulnerability to German attack and occupation and all kinds of things. What can you tell us about Sweden's response to accepting all these Jewish refugees?
Really don't have an answer to that.
Well, you know, I didn't expect you to be an expert.
Don't have a total answer, but I would say, well, as mentioned before, there was a little animosity toward the Jewish folks coming over to Sweden. Again, they weren't readily accepted for openers until Niels Bohr did his thing. I've often wondered myself, where did they stay? There must have been friends and what have you there where they could stay, or maybe they rented a room or what have you and took care of it. But apparently they were welcomed ultimately because of what Niels Bohr did, and the headlines in the newspaper saying, Jews from Denmark will be welcomed.
And the Germans didn't go after Sweden.
The Germans never went after Sweden for whatever reason. Maybe it's nice to have a neutral country right across the water.
We've had a couple of requests to share the email address again for a copy of the book, and indeed it has been supplied. So anybody who is interested in learning more about the book that Bebe talked about, Temple Isaiah's book, We Shall Not Forget, Memories of the Holocaust, the email address that will allow you to obtain a copy is in the chat line. And I see we're putting a slide up there now.
We're trying.
We did.
Good, okay.
Yeah, you know, I would like to add kind of a personal story.
Sure, please.
My family was not Jewish, but we were hiding in Eastern Poland / Western Ukraine because my brother was quadriplegic and my parents were very concerned that he was going to be helped by the Nazis. But I know in the neighboring town, there was a priest called Father Couch. And what he did was he asked all the Jewish families to have the children essentially become Christians. So they changed the names. And so their roles, town roles, suddenly had many, many more children with Christian names. Now the Germans kind of caught up on it and reprimanded him, but he continued to do that. And finally, they arrested him, and he said, "Well, since you love Jews so much, why don't you join them?" And then he was executed in one of the gas chambers, and he said, "This is my best, time to help people." He was a priest with 6 children because Eastern Catholics, are married. Father, but he said, my place is here with my flock. So this was very common that priests hid Jews whenever they could. I know that in Bishop Sheptytsky hid Jews in St. George's Cathedral and wouldn't allow the Nazis to go down in the basement because he said, it's a religious place. So unfortunately, not more could be saved because many were executed. But, I was very pleased to hear about Denmark, a story I did not know, but it also occurred in Poland and Ukraine and other places like that.
Thank you, George. Looks like the Denmark story is really getting some attention here. Ed Willens wants to follow up with a Dane is a Dane is a Dane. And he asks, with anti-Semitism on the rise worldwide, is there any evidence to suggest that it is less so in Denmark even today?
I still think a Dane is a Dane is a Dane. And my mother would echo those words because I think she was the one that said a Dane is a Dane is a Dane. I would say that in Denmark, no, there is no anti-Semitism. I can't say that from experience, but that's just my sense of it.
I had a lovely trip to Denmark last June. God, that was a lifetime away. And not that I was testing it or checking it, but I found Copenhagen and Copenhagen, excuse me, a marvelous, diverse, welcoming place. It's just grand.
Great, we appreciate those comments.
Okay. Sarah, we have a question from Terry Russell. Do you want to take it?
Yes, so this is a wonderful comment, a request to approach LHS leadership to show this program to all of the Lexington youth. I think that is a great idea. Our first step with all of our programs is sharing our recordings with Lex Media. So in fact, this will be available to the entire town and anyone across the world who wishes to view it. So I would encourage, as soon as it is available, it will hopefully be on demand there, to share it with all of your friends and family. And I think it is an amazing idea to share, especially with the high schoolers. I know how difficult it often is to get this far in an American or world history class. And it's very important that these lessons not be skipped over. We have some great stories coming in the chat as well.
We have a couple of comments from folks in the audience. Muffy Martin just would like folks to know a little known fact. Across Lincoln Street from the Hayden skating rink front door, there is a grove of evergreens that is an unmarked memorial to those Lexington Jewish people who served in World War II.
Not really.
I don't know how many people knew about that. I learned of it, says Muffy, when the bench in front of the memorial was dedicated in memory of my daughter. So thank you for letting us know that. We pass that on to you. And what a lovely memorial, what a lovely thing to do for your daughter. I think that sounds like a beautiful spot to sit and think and remember your daughter.
I was able at one point to find out just recently during this year, not because of this program, but I found out a great deal more. So there is more information available about the trees.
You need a little cleaning up.
Yes, from the gardener.
Yeah. From the past president of the garden club.
We know who's sitting there.
There's a question on the chat about how many World War II veterans are still with us. And I've been tracking that. And probably, I would say, about a dozen. We're finding every day a new person coming up. A number of them, of course, are in, either Brookhaven or some other place, but we still probably have about a dozen World War II veterans. Some are quite active. And in fact, I found one who's 100 years old, and he's still writing editorials for New York Times.
Yes, we've had quite the adventures.
Yes.
It's
One
been
of the things that's really interesting with all of these comments here is just how far-reaching this topic is, which is very fascinating. And we even have a message here from Masha Traber saying that her mother was in Ireland visiting her Jewish sister and her sister's husband in 1938, and was able to travel a bit in Europe and speak to the other Jewish people in Yiddish, and eventually came back to New York on a German boat full of German Jewish people, and actually learned the news of Kristallnacht while she was on the boat, and couldn't believe that something like that could happen in the modern world, and not during the Middle Ages when this was supposed to be taking place.
Sarah, do you think people?
Oh, and we also have a book recommendation as well. Sorry.
No, I was just wondering.
Go ahead, Bebe.
In reference to Masha's comment, I'm wondering if people generally know what Kristallnacht was.
Why don't you tell us?
I'm Cantor Doob, help me out here, please. I mean, Kristallnacht, the glass was shattered in all of the shops and everything, but Lisa, can you help?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Kristallnacht is known as the Night of the Broken Glass, and it was a moment in German history where a number of many Jewish shops, which had been identified prior, the glass was broken and there was looting and such, and it really is considered to mark the beginning of persecution of the Jews in that period. At least, it's not that there weren't things before, but this was sort of a sharp moment where it crystallized the fact that this was happening. Night of the Broken Glass.
Thank you.
And if anyone is interested in learning more about the Danish side of things, Mary Dana has given us a recommendation down here called A Night of Watching by Elliot Arnold. So if anyone is interested in learning more about that story, check out the chat. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Interesting you should mention that particular book, because our granddaughter read it and I had not read it, and she gave it to me to read. And there you go. It's a very nice fictional description of what happened to a family in Denmark.
And it's good for young teens.
Yeah, very good, very good. And I would guess Ashley and I have had the experience of going to Auschwitz, and it's very moving. And the other thing I would suggest maybe that people might want to go to Washington, D.C. and see the Holocaust Museum down there. That too is, you won't walk out of the place feeling the same.
Well, you can see why when George, you might want to comment too, when the World War II committee was planning, we knew we wanted to have 6 months worth of lectures. And we wanted to time some of them with VJ Day and VE Day and, have certain themes. But it just seemed like we wanted to have one that would be a fitting end to our year's worth of observances. And I think, judging from the attendance that we've had tonight, judging from the interest and all of the comments that the audience has made, I think we made a very good choice to have this program be the fitting end to the series, because we do not want to forget. And I think a lot of us have learned a great deal tonight that we didn't know. We've renewed our memory and learned an enormous amount that will keep the memory alive. So I think we probably will come to the end of our program. I'm just checking a couple of more chat things here.
I think,
We
Cheryl,
want-
did you have something to add?
Sarah, I'm sorry, what?
Cheryl had something to add.
Okay, so we have one or two more questions or comments, and then we'll wrap things up. Cheryl, did you want to say something? Where are you, Cheryl?
Go ahead.
You need to unmute yourself.
I don't see you, Cheryl.
Okay.
Oh, hi.
The thing that I wanted to say, which is, it's really ironic how we're endeavoring to not forget, to remember. And growing up as a child, my mom and grandparents never spoke about this. My cousin Siggy never told his kids. It wasn't until like the late 90s when they convinced him to do show a testimony. No one knew anything. And this was our own family. And we have stories of family members emigrating unbeknownst to the trouble ahead, to London, to Paris, to Palestine. We have my grandmother's brother who went to Palestine and became, I'm sorry, but it's slipping me for the moment, but a British Israeli freedom fighter, and I forget the name of it. There are so many different stories, and my family never wanted to talk about it. And it honestly wasn't until I got Sig's show a testimony that I was able to get a lot of questions answered. Sadly, he died suddenly before I had a chance to interview him, because I wanted to write a book for our family so that we knew our heritage and we appreciated and were grateful for not only the Italians that saved them, but for all the goodness that our lives brought once they came to the US. And I just think it's an interesting question to ponder, whether it was too painful to revisit. My mom, the only story she shared was at 5 years old, just before they left. She would be lined up with other Jewish children and smacked in the face daily by what were called the brown-shirted thugs. They were the young children. They were basically children who were Nazi sympathizers and behaved in unmentionable ways. So I think it's a really fascinating issue, and I don't know if there's literature out there. I'm going to do some research to kind of understand why there was not any discussion to help us remember. And I'm really pleased to see that each year on Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Remembrance Day, we continue to learn more and more stories. And I love the idea of sharing this presentation with the high schoolers and with any other community organizations that could benefit from that knowledge, so that, with the current events the way they are and the rise of xenophobia, racism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, it's important to remember that we did overcome this and that we're not victim to white supremacy and other disturbing and troubling patterns that are emerging now.
Cheryl, thank you. I think that with your eloquence, I think you have beautifully brought our program to a close. And so I will now ask Bebe to just give some final remarks, thank the panelists, and close out our program. Bebe.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you to Sarah McDonough and George Gamota, to Cantor, Lisa Doob, Cheryl Meadow, and Peter Lund. Thank you to the entire committee and to those who have watched tonight. Jewish law traditionally consists in part of discussion of the 613 commandments to be performed as duty. Those are different from the 10 that came down from on high. In its secondary meaning, the word mitzvah has come to express an individual act of human kindness. So thank you all. You have all individually performed a good deed, a mitzvah. So good night, gute Nacht, and zis schlafen, sweet dreams.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
You.
Good night.
Can't leave.
Right.
Yes.